You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia. Welcome everyone to the Road to Wisdom podcast. Today we are lucky enough to be recording at Selah Valley Estate. We're very excited. And while we are here, we get to speak to Taylor Johnson. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks for having me.
Taylor is a sexologist and men's sex coach, and he is going to chat to us today about a slew of things. We're really excited. We're excited to have a man in here and we can just ask all the horrible questions. No, but Taylor, we're really excited to have you here. I mean, I stumbled across your work, I think one through Layla Martin's show, but also a really interesting reel/video that you did on circumcision, so which we will get into later. But Taylor, do you want to take us through basically the work you do with men? I know a lot of it is separating orgasm from ejaculation, and yeah, do you want to let us know why you would want to do something like that?
Yeah, well, thank you for the introduction and thanks for having me here. And what I'll say to introduce the work that I do is it's about so much more than just that. Like, that is a part of it. And it's funny almost to be asked that question because it's still like the focus is still around ejaculation or not, which is a huge focus of most of men's consciousness in sex. It's totally reasonable and totally understandable, and was a huge focus of my entire experience of sex too for many years. Like, oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, I did it. Oh, damn it. Oh shit. Like, shame, all of this stuff. And there's so much more in the realm of what sexual mastery even means, like, so yes, learning how to do that is part of it for sure. But also learning how to confidently go into the bedroom is one of those things. Learning how to navigate attraction with your partner in relationship, learning how to navigate the nuances of being in long-term partnership, learning how to use your words for sexual arousal and flirtation, and learning how just anatomy functions and works in different kinds of bodies. So like, there's so many different pieces to it. And I'll say that my access point for this work really came from a deep struggle that I personally experienced in my early mid-20s, late teens, where I was just a complete sexual mess. And I struggled with about every sexual dysfunction you could imagine, from sexual anxiety and premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction and porn addiction. And just like, I was a total mess in that realm, and decided that I had to figure out what it was like to have good sex in my lifetime. So read a ton of books, went to a bunch of workshops, spent a lot of money studying this stuff, and figured it out in my own life. And it turns out it actually started to improve my business life and the money that I was making and my friendships too. And I realized, wow, like, there really is a reason why people have written books about this. Like, there's a reason certain esoteric traditions talk about this work as being incredibly powerful and more so than just about sex. And I'm feeling it and I'm living it. Then that's all I wanted to start talking about. And my friend said, Taylor, why don't you start a blog or Instagram or do something with this, and don't just talk to us about it, like, put it out into the world. And I started doing that, and people were interested. And then slowly it pivoted into a career. And it's much more meaningful than my previous career, which was fun too. But instead of now working for a bunch of different, very large corporations, I'm helping people create better sex lives and relationships. And through that, I believe, like, really positively impacting the world too. So that's my intro spiel.
Well, yeah. No, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I guess people would come to our podcast and be like, okay, why are they talking about sex? But I'm also such a big believer in your sex life and the way you're able to harness that life force, having a flow-on effect in your relationship, in the way that you parent, in the way that you appear in the world. So I'm really glad that you touched on all of that, because I found it really important. And also it's really fun. It's fun to work at this stuff. So, really admire what you do. And yeah, you touched on lots of points there that I could have.
Well, may I just speak to one that's up for me based on like a little twist that you said, which is, if you think about the hierarchy of needs of humans, there's one, survival, right? That's like a core need for us: vitality, food, shelter, etc. But at least on a biological level, like the very next thing is procreation. Perpetuate the species, keep families alive, et cetera, et cetera. So those two things are really, really hardwired into us. And like, you must do these things. You must find food. You must find shelter. You must have sex. Like, those are deep biological drives within us. And it's my opinion that if we don't bring awareness to one of the deepest biological drives of being alive as a human, then it can start messing with all different parts of our lives. Unconsciously, it can mess us up when we're at work, when we're in meetings with different people, when we're talking to our parents, or when we're raising our children, like all of those things. So I do really believe that the sexual choices that we make impact all of our life. And it's this illusion that we have in the modern world that sex and our sexual decisions just live in a little box that's isolated down in our genitals. And we think we can compartmentalize it and go off and, like masturbate to porn every night and then come back out and have a healthy experience with our partner or whatever. And we don't realize the impact, and we don't realize the impact on our work too. And so maybe it's not porn, but maybe it's a particular style of fantasy or masturbation that's maybe good or bad. But regardless of that, I think it's just useful to bring awareness to these things. And then once you do that, then you can bring skillfulness and cultivation to those things. And then the beauty can just exponentially explode from there.
Absolutely.
In a good way.
Yeah. Great exploding. No, I'm glad you mentioned porn, because we actually have, we've spoken about porn on our show before. We spoke with Joe Robinson, if anyone wants to go back to that episode. And basically it was how our youth has such easy access to porn. I mean, some of the statistics she was spitting out at us was like, most boys have seen like hardcore, some form of hardcore porn before they've even held hands with another girl. And so this is like largely where our youth is learning sex and intimacy. Like, this is the intimacy, I'm using quotations for anyone who's only listening, in their relationships. So I'd love to actually, because I know that your work started because you had an issue with porn, and I'd love for you to explain to our listeners where, like, if this is the trajectory and our kids are learning sex from porn, like, where is that ending up when they're adults?
I just want to touch as well, like, it also would be nice to just keep it as general, because I also feel like as much as we are mothers and we want to be able to like send our kids off in this direction, I feel like there are a lot of dads and partners who could revert back to porn in times of like postpartum and things like that, when sex is a little bit like off the cards maybe, or, like, I don't think it's just the kids. I think like it would be so great to touch on this for, understanding how severe it can be in this time as well as adults.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great topic, and porn itself is excuse me, is a massive topic, and there's so many different opinions and access points. And so I'll just share that, number one, I'm not some sort of porn evangelist who's going to say like porn is always bad all the time, you should never watch it. But what I do believe is that porn is, I kind of think of porn as like cocaine for your sexual response system, especially for guys. It's so highly stimulating. It's so addictive. And I'm not just saying that to use a buzzword. Like, neurological studies have shown that porn is addictive in ways very similar to how hard drugs impact the brain and the body, right? And so there are some people out there who can occasionally do cocaine in their lives and be functional. And it doesn't negatively impact anything, right? I would say that's in a smaller minority of people, And so with porn, perhaps there are people out there who can use it occasionally with the awareness and knowledge of what it is and still have healthy relationships. What I've found is for the majority of guys that I work with, it's very, very difficult for them to do that to the point to which they have problems with it, and it impacts their romantic and sexual relationships. And I want to empathize with I'm not a parent right now. I don't know what it's like to be in the postpartum phase. I've only heard from some of my best friends, and I can only imagine, right? So I bow down to you and anyone else listening who is a parent, so I imagine it's challenging and hard. And I've been in my own phases in my own relationships when sex has been off the table, and the porn becomes very attractive in those times too. And so maybe there's a way that you can use it that actually serves your relationship. And maybe there's a way that you use it that doesn't. And ultimately, I would say that should be the metric. Is it serving your relationship? Is it serving your life? Really, truthfully, is it serving the things that you care most deeply about to have that experience? If it really truthfully is, and you're not just trying to convince yourself of some shadow, sure, but bring awareness and honesty to yourself and have that be the metric. And if it's not great, do something else, So I was listening to a podcast recently, I'm sure everybody knows the Huberman podcast. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he had a guy named Cal Newport who was on recently, who was talking about phone addiction. And it was really useful for me dealing with these devices that are super highly addictive that I have here on airplane mode right now. But one of the things he said is really applicable to people who are dealing with a problematic usage of porn too. And problematic usage of porn, I would classify as something where they feel pulled towards it. There's this gravitational force that feels like it hooks them and draws them in. And they can almost watch themselves opening up the laptop and going to it, on autopilot and not wanting to and knowing it's going to fuck things up, but doing it anyway. He says it's so much easier for people who have addictive tendencies with things like that to fill that time with something else useful and productive, instead of just trying to stop watching porn, or stop using the phone. So intentionally schedule or put other strategies in place. Like for me, one of my favorite things to do is practice drumming and actually practice with, certain specific things. And I do that because it cultivates something that I'm wanting to work on. Maybe for somebody else, it could be breath work, or maybe for somebody else, it could be reading, but having something ready to go that you can put into action to change the behavior, shift into something else. It's a really useful technique for people. And I'll pause there because there's so many different directions we could go. And I want to see what's alive for you hearing all that.
Well, I think something that I think interests me most about porn and where my head's at a bit more is I have sons, and I just want to be on the front foot of when they come of age and they're being exposed to these things. How do we introduce themes and topics of sex that in a way doesn't shame them around sex or anything like that, but at the same time lets them know that what you're seeing play out on your computer in front of you is not real, and this is not real connection, and the difference between theatrics and what sexual encounters actually look like. So tips. Any tips? That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll just be transparent and say this is not an area that I've spent a ton of time focusing on and working in, but I do think it's incredibly important. And I also I cannot imagine what it would be like to be a teenager right now or to grow up with this sort of access. I'm probably the last generation who, when I masturbated to porn growing up, it was just pixels slowly loading on a screen. And I would be like, come on, where's the breast? Where's the breast? And so a very different level of stimulation, So, wow, it's so intense. And to be a parent right now, again, a lot of empathy. And gosh, I think really just open, honest conversations. And I would imagine it's probably really helpful for parents to talk to other parents about how they're doing it, And I like, from what I've heard from at least my friends, and maybe I am in a very quote unquote alternative sphere. But they're like, yeah, we just straight up talk with our kids. We just talk about it. Like, hey, there's this thing called porn. You've probably already seen it. It can feel really good to look at, let's talk about it. And also sex is nice. And they've already had conversations about sex prior to that, and talking about it, not as this thing that's like hidden away, tucked away, that's private and dirty or whatever. It's like, oh, this is a really beautiful part of life, and I like to do it with your mom or your dad or, whoever. And it's, it's really sweet. And so it's already primed with positivity before the porn piece comes in.
I like
and I think there's a lot, when I think back to being a kid and when I think to the kids that I know, like there's a deep craving, I think, in a lot of children to be treated as on some level equals, like, yes, there's a desire to be led and parented to, but also to be spoken to as somebody who has sovereignty on some level and who has some level of intelligence and skillfulness with how they navigate the world too. And to assume that there's maybe some maturity there, I think feels really good for them to receive, be like, hey, let's have a real down to earth conversation.
Yeah.
Again, not being a parent, I don't know.
All right. Well, let's spin on like how would, like, if someone was watching, like a parent during that phase of time, postpartum time, was watching porn, why would that be such a bad thing?
If it was, a parent was?
Yeah. Like if there's that, like the dry time or, like it's just not something that's on the table.
If you're experiencing mismatched libidos.
Yeah, like, exactly. Totally. Mismatched libidos, like how would porn potentially negatively impact that, and like kind of what's happening there?
Yeah. So I'll just like cite the research really, which just says men who watch porn alone regularly, they report less satisfaction in relationships. They find their partner less attractive over time. They're less happy as individuals. There's just all these things that are highly correlated with watching porn, and so causation, it's hard to say exactly, but I would really question that behavior if it's something that's happening regularly. And it's one of those things that it doesn't seem like it's doing much, maybe 1 or 2 times in, but then all of a sudden these little insidious things start to creep in. And maybe the next week, like you're having a conversation with your partner in the kitchen and they say something, and instead of having the usual loving frame that you carry for them, you might just get a little angry all of a sudden and more irritable and snap at them. And you're not going to make the connection like, oh, it's because I watched porn 4 times last week. But that's the kind of thing that porn can do to your brain and emotional reactivity and attraction and love for your partner in relationship, And so maybe I imagine it can, and again, my understanding is speaking about men who watch porn. I'm not as familiar with the research on women who watch porn. And I know there are large differences in how our brains process and how our bodies process sexuality and information. I've focused primarily on men. And yeah, I guess the last thing is I just want to also empathize with the piece and say, I imagine it can feel really good and enlivening to watch porn if you haven't had sex for 6 months with your partner and you just want to feel that sexual aliveness. Like, of course, that's going to feel good in the moment. And then, is it really ultimately serving your life and your partner's life and your relationship? Keep coming back to that question.
Well, I guess a lot of our listeners are mums, and I know I've spoken to so many mums about not feeling just like libido, losing your libido is a really common thing in parenthood. Yeah. And, like a lot of mums don't sleep for years and a lot of mums don't feed themselves properly. So they're not getting that juicy libido. Their cycles aren't even there. There's just like a full disconnect from their own body because they are constantly serving. And so, like a man, I imagine, could also match that as well sometimes because there is just such a lack of, and it just becomes like the norm. So, I've spoken to lots and lots of mums who dwell in that type of area, but they have such an inner craving for that. So for more. And I guess it's kind of, they're like, well, where do we even begin of kind of coming back together, or, you know, maybe the mum has like, you know, such low libido, or maybe they're just like, it's just been such a, I don't know, like they're just needing that time or the know how to kind of come back together. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for the question. It's super important. And I guess I'll speak to two things that come up. Number one is to own that so this piece that we're talking about here is something that my partner and I have been navigating in our own relationship with buying a house together and moving in together and living in close proximity, even though we don't have kids. And so I don't put myself out there as somebody who's highly skilled or educated in the realm of how to bring your libido back when it's gone. But I will say we've had pretty great success with some of the things that we've done. And one of the things that I would say is so important is that for anybody who feels that way, it's likely there's a whole, I mean, kind of like you said, there's a whole list of needs that aren't getting met, right? and maybe some of those needs are on a legitimate pause for a while because you're raising a newborn, and it's just not possible to have 3 hours of free time in a day, or even 30 minutes of free time in a day, you know? And so there are times and phases for that. And one thing that can be really helpful is to actually name those things and to be heard in those things and to receive empathy for those things. And a lot of times that's a big enough pressure release valve to just at least create some more spaciousness in the relationship for arousal to come in. You know, a lot of people think like, oh, I need to bring in this technique, or I need to start doing this thing to build more arousal. Well, maybe you just really need to be heard or listened to, you know, by a friend or by a therapist or by your partner and a friend at the same time. And I've seen that actually can catalyze a lot of healing in the realms of like reigniting libido, if you want to use those words. You know, it's usually never as simple as just like, oh, I'm going to start doing this thing and the libido comes back. Like there's usually lots of interpersonal or, you know, emotional dynamics under the surface, it seems to me. And I want to give a reference to two people who've really helped us in our own relationship. And you might know them or you might not, but Justin Patrick Pierce and London Winters, they're an amazing couple who have a 5-year-old right now, and they've been married, I think it's for about 10 years. And they actually wrote a book that's next to me. It's called Playing with Fire. They basically, their whole thing is like how to keep sex alive in long-term relationship. And that's their whole thing. And they're masters at it. And they have regularly had amazing sex for a decade in their relationship through raising a child. And, you know, it's like, definitely check those people out if you're listening, and possibly have them on your podcast too, because they can speak to this for hours with tons of skillful things to do.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so part of my job too is if I don't feel like I have the right or the full complete answers to things, I want to be able to send people in the right direction to where they can get those answers too. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I might turn this around a little bit. We've had the question come through quite a few times on circumcision and also actually vasectomies. But any kind of surgery in that area.
Yeah.
Apologies for all the baby noises. So I'd love to, because you did do a video on circumcision and basically the anatomy and how that affects men as adults. We've spoken about just the trauma alone that it causes for babies and why you wouldn't want to go down that for those reasons. We would have so many friends and a lot of people's partners would be circumcised and be like traversing that as it was just routinely done for our generation. So would you be able to explain to us how this affects the anatomy and I guess sexual experiences for men later down the track, just so that I guess women can, one, make informed decisions, but two, if our partner is circumcised, how we can navigate that?
Yeah, well, it's a huge topic. And the first thing I'll say is that people, how would I say this? There's a lot of charge around it, right? So there's a lot of guys who are circumcised who are, maybe they have a lot of anger or grief or frustration that they were circumcised as a baby, and they feel like, oh, I'm missing out, I'm missing out on amazing sex. I'm missing out on sensation. I'm missing out on this part of my body. And like, I just want to say for you, if that's you listening, or if your partner's with somebody like that, like, it is still possible to have amazing sex, right? And you've probably had great sex in your life already up until this point, and it's not going to be the determining factor on whether or not you can have great sex. And there are certain benefits that I believe come from being what people call intact, right? Or not being circumcised. And so that's what I made that YouTube video about, which is, I think, what you're asking me about. And so I'll just share, like, it's an interesting piece. Most people don't think about this, but like the anatomy of the penis, the anatomy of a penis that still has the skin around it. Like when you're having sex with somebody, it was so useful in the YouTube video because I had the visual there with the cucumber and the sock around it. But think about it. So if there's a penis going into a vagina or an anus, right, there's some sort of lubrication needs to be there, right? And if it's in the vagina, then possibly natural lubrication in addition to whatever other lubrication is there, right? If it's a circumcised penis, it's just skin on skin friction, right? It's just like rubbing together without any rolling of the skin. I don't know if are you going to publish this video too?
Yeah,
or is it just
yes.
audio?
The video will be
Okay. So
for anyone who needs visuals, YouTube and iTunes, you'll be able to get it.
Great. Yeah, I'm doing things with my hands here. So if a penis is not circumcised, then there's that extra skin there. And once you get fully inserted in your partner, that skin can actually stay in contact with the vaginal or the anal canal, and the penis can sort of move in and out through the sheath of the skin, which reduces the actual skin on skin friction, which can feel really good to some people, because one complaint that people have who might have sex for an extended period of time is to start to feel raw, or they start to feel worn out or like burning sensations or, whatever after a little while. And yes, more lubrication is helpful with that, but also like the penis has this natural, like self-lubricating device that is the skin. And I think that's pretty cool. And most people don't think about that. Most people don't talk about that, And so when I think of like, oh, we were born that way, there's a reason that exists, like that's one of them. Also, it protects this really sensitive part of our body, and if you want my opinion, I think the choice should be left to the child. Like that's just my opinion. Everyone is entitled to their own. But what I've seen in working with men is that there are a lot of men who are circumcised, who have a lot of deep grief that it happened to them against their will.
Yeah, I've definitely heard stories like that as well. So thank you for acknowledging that for all the men who don't or haven't been able to put words to that. While we are on the subject, we'll speak about vasectomies because, as you know, we both have 5 children. We're done. We've been looking at fertility awareness method as a form of contraception. However, it's not the most reliable. So we've had a lot of people in our community who question vasectomies and are fearful around them. So from the research that you've done and the people you have spoken to, and I guess even your clients, what have you seen as the main theme around vasectomies?
At least in the people that I've talked to who've had them. And so I've had legitimate conversations with somewhere between 30 and 40 guys who have had them. So I'm coming from a lot of subjective conversations, but everyone I've talked to has been thrilled that they got one.
Okay.
Totally.
Good to know. Good to know.
They've been thrilled. And maybe they have like self-selected to be the people that talk to me. I don't know. But all of them, including like some of my closest friends, have gotten vasectomies and they have just like raved about it, loving it. And the freedom they experience, the freedom from anxiety the freedom from like a whole list of things that you could probably imagine is been massive, massive for them, to the point where like it's like they didn't even realize how much the fear of or intentionality around pregnancy was impacting even their levels of desire with their partner, you know. And then all of a sudden, now that they've had kids and they don't want any more kids and they have had a vasectomy and now pregnancy is just like off the table for them, they're just on, you know? And so there's their partner and there's this whole like boost in arousal for both people because that component isn't there anymore, you know? And for them, it's been really beautiful. And if I were in a place where I knew for sure I didn't want kids, like I would get a vasectomy, like 100%.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm not there right now. Like we're in the conversation about children, and that's, you know, So that if that happens, that'll be just within the next few years, right? So this is not the time for me to do that. But when the time comes that I am for sure don't want children, like I'm going to get a vasectomy, unless some like wild piece of research comes out from left field that's like, hey, by the way, this is ruining ... which to my knowledge doesn't exist. Then that's going to be what I'm going to do.
That's selling it.
Yeah.
I was always like, I can't make Brenton get a vasectomy, but now I'm like, maybe I could.
Listen to our podcast, Brenton.
Maybe he should.
Yeah, I mean, somebody I'm close to got a vasectomy, and like I went through the whole process with him, just like hearing his story. And he like came to hang out with a couple other guys, and he showed us his testicles, and we were like, whoa, look at that. And it did look fucked up. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like,
okay.
Immediately after you get bruised, you know, and it's not the most pleasant sensation for some days afterwards, but it's like temporary pain for an immense gain, you know, in my opinion. Now, I'd be curious to know, like you said, that there are people in your community who have fears around it. And I'd be curious to hear what those would be. Or even if you could name one of them.
Yeah. Well, I think for me and my partner, we've been practicing Tao and found Tantra. And when we started questioning a lot of the other surgeries and things that, you know, just routinely happen with children, that curiosity naturally went into vasectomies as well, because when we started talking contraception, well, that's got, you know, the pill and other forms of hormonal contraception are just not on the table for us. So, that method of contraception definitely came up. And I guess just around like surgeries in delicate areas is always like, I think it's always healthy to question that and what potential side effects can be. But I actually heard a story that from a friend who was talking to a doctor who does vasectomies, and a couple went in who had 6 children, and they're like, we're done. We don't want any more kids. It's like vasectomy, got to do it. And they went and had the vasectomy, and I think a year later they came back and they're like, you've got to reverse the vasectomy. And the doctor was like, what? You've got 6 kids. Like, why do you want more kids? And they're like, no, it's played on our sex life. Like almost the fear or like just the potential of creating human life was the turn on for them, and removing that from the picture impacted their sex life. So I just that's one anecdotal story, but it's one that kind of stuck with me, and I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that. Like, what if this is our kink?
There's also a lot of vasectomy babies. Like I've heard from older generations that they had a vasectomy baby, and I've heard it so many times. So there's also that. But I feel like the biggest fear would be like you're actually doing something that's really unnatural, and does the body, you know, create some kind of adaptation to that? Or is there like a bigger healing phase or some mechanism that jumps in and is like, okay, we've got to fix this, or there's something blocking here? Or is that a cause for any kind of, you know, health problem down there? But I think that's where the fears kind of come from for a lot of people.
And so, like, I guess
yeah.
too, we talk about fertility and how that is it's such a big indicator of health and libido as well. And so when we're looking at stopping fertility, like, is that going to impact your health? Will it impact your libido? That kind of thing?
Let me ask you a question. Like, how many guys are going out and ejaculating into a cup to get a semen analysis to check their fertility on a regular basis as they get older? Like, probably zero, unless they're having trouble conceiving, right? So like, I totally hear that. And also, like, it logically does, it fails the logic test in terms of a reason to not do it. Because like, if you get an erection, if you can still ejaculate, like, by all means, like, you're basically fertile. Like, whether or not you're ejaculating sperm is only like 3 to 5% of the total volume of ejaculate anyway, and I do hear the thing also about like, oh, well, it's unnatural, to do that. That argument, like, I can empathize with it too. And also, look at the world that's around us. Like, we're doing so much unnatural shit already. Like, even with our own
isn't
bodies.
unnatural.
Yeah.
Like,
No, but like the consequences of an unwanted pregnancy would result in an abortion for a lot of people, and that is like far more unnatural.
this is true.
So,
Totally. And when I was saying unnatural too, I mean like all the life things that we're doing. Like,
Yeah,
we're using technology
everything.
for this. We're getting eye surgery for this. People are getting cosmetic surgery. Like, there's just all kinds of unnatural stuff happening everywhere.
We're ripping that shit apart here.
You got Botox?
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Let's chat about that shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately it's a choice that anyone is going to have to make on their own, of course. And like you said, I would much rather, if I knew that I was done having kids, I would much rather have a vasectomy than either get pregnant and have to have an abortion, or get pregnant and have to have a kid that we were not prepared for or felt done with,
Well, it's hard
because who knows?
We've both done the get pregnant and have a kid that we weren't prepared for. And turns out they're really cute still. So that's like a really hard, like.
But I actually love I love your perspective, because it is good, because we rarely do hear about how, great and it is, and how, positive it has been. So I do really love hearing that, because.
And it's rational. So thank you for bringing that.
For sure. And, like, if you want the experience in relationship of thinking you're done with kids, but having the magical possibility of another kid coming in, like, don't have a vasectomy.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
That's also an option, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Taylor, take us through.
It's get a bit juicy. Let's just spice this up a little bit.
Vasectomies or no, we would still want to have the ability to retain our semen and separate semen from orgasm. This is beneficial for women. I can vouch to it. And and also for men, although we can't speak on the man front. So if you would like to speak to that, yes. Why would we want to, even after a vasectomy, be able to retain semen? Is that did I word that correctly?
I think you said it perfectly. Like, we all know what you're talking about at this point. Yeah. And so I will say that, there have been a lot of men who I've worked with who have had vasectomies who still also choose to not ejaculate every time they have sex, and they find great value in it. And there's a lot of people who, prior to becoming informed or prior to learning about it, would think like, oh, well, if I get a vasectomy, then that means I can just ejaculate and not lose my erection and ejaculate again and again and again. And it's just an endless spree of, but that's not how it works. An ejaculatory orgasm, the full thing, it's a biological process, but it's even more so a neurological process and a hormonal process in the body. And it affects the entire nervous system and brain chemistry, et cetera. And so, whether or not you have a vasectomy, every time you have a full ejaculatory orgasm, there's a flood of hormones, a whole cocktail that like comes through your brain and your whole body that gives you the job well done reward, and most of us can understand. Like most guys know what that's like. And most people who have sex with guys, like they know what it's like to have sex with a guy and then watch him have an ejaculatory orgasm. And afterwards there's just this, like there's something like that, right? Where the guy is just totally relaxed into his experience and everything is good afterwards, right? So sometimes in sex, we might not want to go straight to that point of the sort of a thing. You know, maybe we actually want to have sex for longer. And maybe we might actually want to have that same level of orgasmic pleasure that then continues for a longer period of time, that doesn't immediately end in sex ending and having to like go to sleep or eat food or, you know, disconnect in some way. And even if it's not a disconnection, the quality of the connection fundamentally changes after an ejaculatory orgasm. For most guys, there's some rare percentage of guys that for whatever reason can have an ejaculatory orgasm and then keep being sexually aroused and keep going in sex, but it seems to be a pretty small percentage of guys overall, right? And so there are just some practical reasons. I've found also throughout my own personal exploration and study with this stuff is that I can't have sex with my partner multiple times in a row and ejaculate every time and then still want to have sex with her in the same way. That just like, that's not how I'm wired. And that doesn't appear to be how most guys are wired, you know? And if you want to keep that sort of sexual intensity or arousal, sustain it for, you know, an extended period of time, perhaps years or perhaps a week, you know, it's useful.
Good. Years. Yes. Yeah. Let's go with years.
Yeah. So it's useful to start practicing with that and playing with that and experimenting with that. And I do want to say, like, it's not the thing that makes or breaks arousal over time, but it is a helpful contributing factor for guys to become aware of the impact of ejaculatory orgasm on their own system and on their relationship and on their attraction to their partner as well, too. So I'm not one of those tantric guys who says you should never ejaculate unless you're trying to procreate, because that perspective exists also, right? And in the world of Tantra, I'm just going to speak to this for like 30 seconds. There's so many different perspectives. It's just like, it's as similar to as if I were to say, like, in the world of sex, there are that many opinions in the world of Tantra too. So there are people who will say you should never ejaculate unless you want to have sex, or you should ejaculate only on the full moon, or you should ejaculate once every 90 days, or with the seas, you know, just so many different perspectives on this. So I'm a fan of ejaculatory choice, which means you just do it when you want to, don't do it when you don't want to. It's a very simple way to say it. I found it for myself. If I do it once every 10 to 12 days or so, like that's the best optimal frequency for my life. And when I say do it, I mean ejaculate. And I can have sex or be sexual in that time frame, but not ejaculate. And my partner and I, we've been sexual maybe 3 times in the past week, and I chose to ejaculate one of those times. And I'd say like that would be a common every 3, 4, or 5 times for me.
Yeah, okay.
Something like that. And what I've found is like it has done really beautiful things for the sex in my relationship too, because prior to me getting to the point of ejaculatory choice, where sometimes in sex I wouldn't even ejaculate at all by choice, the whole focus or crescendo or climax of sex itself was ejaculation, and it was just focused on whether or not or when I had that experience, you know. Mm-hmm. And it was just lead up and build up to this thing. And when that goal was not the focal point anymore, all these other doors of pleasure opened up. And it's really interesting to, you know, I don't know your audience, but like in talking with a lot of different people that I've talked to, specifically when I've talked with women who have had sex with other women, or maybe they've had a sexual experience with another woman, one of the first things that so many of them will say is like, oh my God, I didn't know it could just go and keep going and keep going. And the magical pleasure is still there, and it didn't end in an ejaculation. Like, and their realization, like their actual felt sense realization of that was life-changing for them. Cause then they realized, oh, wow, this is the, this is the potential for female sexuality, right? Like this is what's possible there. And most women who have sex with men have never experienced that.
It is possible.
It's possible.
I can circle back around and just say one other thing that I meant to say earlier that I forgot to, but it's my understanding that the fertility awareness method, when it's done correctly, and actually you're taking the basal body temperature and you're doing the biomarkers, that is actually like very highly effective statistically. The issue is when you're not doing it like obsessively, you know, getting the biomarkers and charting it, like that's when people say that it failed, but actually it was user error, you know, and not the system error.
Yeah, 100%.
And
yeah.
I think too, just because we've spoken to Sarah Honey on the podcast about fertility awareness method, just so our audience knows, because we do have a lot of postpartum mamas, breastfeeding can also affect how accurate fertility awareness method is. So just users beware that we're talking about women who are not postpartum, where it is quite effective.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. So my partner and I, we've been using the fertility awareness for over 4 years and we haven't gotten pregnant. I know that we're both fertile also because we've done those tests just for the sake of interest and because we're the people that we are. But also she has not had a child before and she wasn't in postpartum during that time, you know. But yeah, I would ejaculate inside her when it was the right time to do so according to the schedule. And so far, so good.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, just the other part, because we were talking about ejaculatory choice, you know, and fertility awareness is like, that's a big piece too, is around pregnancy or pregnancy prevention. You know, it's like, well, maybe you don't want to ejaculate inside your partner right now, or maybe you don't want to ejaculate at all because your partner is a day away from ovulation, you know, or 2 days away or 3 or even 4 days away from ovulation. And you're just like, maybe it's not the right time to do that. And because even like a guy can ejaculate. And so this is, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. You might already know this, but like a guy can ejaculate and then they can go eat some food or whatever and do something different and then come back to sex a while later and then have sex again. And he doesn't ejaculate, but because he previously ejaculated earlier that day, she can get pregnant.
Yeah.
Because it's all still in the system, you know? So
yeah, I think the female body can keep semen alive for up to 5 days.
Yeah.
So,
but even the male body inside the penis after an ejaculation, if he doesn't pee, like that can still be all in the pipes, you know? And so when you have sex again, then that can still come out.
Ah, good to know.
Yeah.
Little tidbits of information.
Yeah.
We're
So
starting
like a guy,
to clue together how all these babies come to be.
Yeah, totally. And some just happen miraculously, you know, but there are people, a lot of people who get pregnant who think, oh, well, I pulled out and then I went to the bathroom and washed up and cleaned off. And then we continued sex. I'm like, well, it's still inside your penis. And then you went back inside her. Like, of course, you know, and the body wants to get pregnant. Like this is what we're designed to do. So it's going to try to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have spoken previously on like your ovulatory phase is probably, as a woman, especially postpartum, is like the time where you feel the most like having sex. And it's like the time that you really don't want to be in that position of, unless you really want another baby. I know all the dynamics that we need to think about when trying to naturally not conceive.
There's a lot here. I think we've spoken about so many things, but I think it's like it feels like a really nice thing to be able to tap into more, and especially from the man's perspective of, you know, like holding back and kind of using that as like a charge. I mean, like in the parenting realm, it just seems like such a beautiful thing to be able to have, like as a father, all of that and the sustained energy and like the motivation and like, you know, because shit changes so much for men when they become fathers, and you kind of need that, like the energy to just be like, okay, I want to be a present father. I need to make money. I need to go out there, but I also need to have a, like satisfied relationship. Like there's so many things. And I just feel like this is such a big part of modern day fatherhood, or could be used to such a high advantage, because it's like a biological force, and that beautiful energy that you're creating for yourself and your partner. And it just seems like the ripple out effect would be too hard to kind of just like let that go to waste. So I think
I'd love to actually
100%.
ask. So I just remembered my question. Have you heard of John Gray?
No.
Okay, so John Gray wrote a book.
Men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Yeah, it is an age-old book, but it's fantastic and still quite relevant. But he speaks about like each time a man ejaculates, like he halves his testosterone. So testosterone builds and then I've also heard him speak on like the nutrients you lose, et cetera, like more from the scientific side of things every time you ejaculate. And I don't have any evidence to back this up, but one of the things that we thought with semen retention was that it would keep your testosterone levels up high. And that could be why, like after ejaculation, like you half your testosterone, it affects your mood, it affects maybe your connection with your partner. With semen retention, you're not depleting those levels of testosterone, or it's not quite the jump, plateau of testosterone that you would experience otherwise. And therefore that mood would carry out through your day, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you've heard or read any of that stuff.
So I'll speak to that briefly. And also it's my understanding that the halving of the testosterone is not accurate, at least based on the research. It's a nice like soundbite, but it's not accurate. But there are certain impacts on testosterone with ejaculation, and let's see, do I want to cite those or just speak to it overall?
Just speak to it overall.
I guess so we're always, lots of people are looking for the one biomarker that will help them understand the thing, right? And there's a lot of focus on testosterone, especially now, and understandably so, because across society, men's testosterone levels are dropping dramatically from where they used to be decades ago. Like that's just a fact. That's the reality of the situation. And it's scary for a lot of people. So people are like, oh, how do I boost my testosterone? How do I feel more like, on a regular basis? And it's interesting just to share a personal anecdote. Last year, after buying this house, after moving in here and going through a big renovation process and construction thing, I started to feel kind of depleted. And I thought, well, I'm 38, maybe my testosterone's low, so I got a test and it was within the normal range, but I thought, okay, I'm going to try to boost this. And so in addition to being intentional with my ejaculatory choice, I also did a bunch of testosterone boosting things like leg workouts. I got like physical competition, like jujitsu and playing basketball a lot of the time. I would relax more. I got massages. I did a lot of saunaing, and it was wild. At the end of the 30 days, I did another test and I was sure that my testosterone levels were going to be sort of through the roof, right? Because I was feeling more charged. I was feeling more vital. It was like stronger, more alive, this sort of zestful, like it was in me. And I thought, surely this is testosterone. And I did the second test. It was basically the same. Like, I think it had actually gone down like 3 points, and my mind was like blown. And the thing that had changed was my cortisol levels had dropped like 30%, which is massive.
Yeah.
That's huge. So like, in fact, I didn't need to boost my testosterone. I just needed to de-stress. I just needed to chill out and like actually receive a massage, on a regular basis. And so like, I say that in response to your question, because there's a lot of guys out there who will think, well, I just need to add on this thing or add on this practice or do this thing. And it's coming from this mindset of, oh, we have to build, we have to go produce, like create. And I think for actually a lot of men, the thing that will help you feel more alive and vital and charged is to actually receive some sort of restoration in your life that allows your body to heal legitimately, and then the natural vibrancy can start to come back. Like, because if you're, the crazy thing is, like, if you're stressed, it doesn't matter how high your testosterone gets. Your body literally doesn't allow your system to utilize it. And so to make that full circle, I do believe that being intentional with your ejaculations and frequency can give men a certain level of zest and clarity of mind and focus and vibrance and motivation with their life that's really valuable and really useful. And I think it's worth exploring. If you're a guy, if you're partners with a man who's listening to this, like, this is something that generations have talked about for a long time. Thousands of years, they've recognized the impact of this. And they're not saying don't ever ejaculate. They're just saying learn how it really does affect you, and learn how you can utilize your sexual arousal and energy to be more effective at work or as a parent or as a friend or anything like that. And I imagine, especially as a parent, it's so important because you're so taxed. There was a study that I think just came out in the United States that said, I think it's 50% of parents are actually, like, self-described as just straight up struggling and overstressed and freaking out because they don't know how to do everything, and they're just holding on by a thread. And that's, like, I don't know what it is like in Australia, but, like, things have changed since COVID. It's like, it's stressful as fuck for a lot of people right now. So like, any little edge you can get is going to be useful. And I think this is one of the biggest edges that men can have, is to be aware of their potency that actually is their life force in their system. And to close that circle with one other thought, which makes me understand the perspective around vasectomy, is back when I dated women in the past who were on hormonal birth control, and I could ejaculate at any point without consequence, it allowed me to have a much more mindless sexuality and sexual experience. So I wasn't attuned to her cycle. I wasn't attuned to the potency of ejaculation. I wasn't attuned to the impact of that stuff. And so I could just ejaculate mindlessly. And I would be in these sort of depleted places where I wasn't appreciating or respecting the process, And then when I started doing the fertility awareness method with my partners, like, that entirely changed internally, like my respect for, reverence for the process, but also my own life and the impact of that. Like, it was a massive, massive change. And that's not spoken about that often either. But that
it's
that
nice
really
to
did
hear that from a man's perspective too, because
thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
totally.
Fertility is like a two-person thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've previously spoken about how your partner can actually also be really in tune with your cycle, like knowing what your cervix feels like when you are fertile, when you're not fertile, like knowing those signs so that you can work at it together. So let's bring this in, and you can make that fun.
Yeah. I've done it. I will tell you that it has been fun for me as a man to do that.
Good to know.
Because then it's also fun for me because I like to look at the schedule. Like, I'll pull out my actual calendar on my phone and be like, oh, she's going to be ovulating then. That means she's going to be post-ovulatory window at that point. Ooh, that means we can do that thing. That's nice.
All the things that we can explore in the near future, hopefully, when we get our beds back.
Yes.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much for joining us on the Road to Wisdom podcast. If people want to find you, learn more from you, where can they?
Probably in a link in your show notes, but then also,
done.
then also, if you just do a Google search for my name, Taylor Johnson, sex coach, like, I should be the first thing to pop up.
You are.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I have my own podcast called Sex Upgraded. It's for men. And I just want to say thank you for having me here. It's been really sweet. And it's the first podcast I've done where there've been babies on too, which is, it's been really sweet.
There's a lot of breastfeeding involved.
Oh my God.
It's great. It's great. It actually kind of makes me feel like I'm living in, like, my community here. So, it's sweet.
Just a glimpse into your future.
Amazing.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much again for coming. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast.
To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.